Can you tell our viewers here what to expect, having worked on both the military and intelligence side here, in the days ahead, once this action actually begins? If the goal is to destroy Hamas, what will become of Gaza?
Well, I don't think there's much question that Israel is going to do a ground invasion of Gaza. I've talked to friends in Israel. There's a very strong feeling that Israel has to go after Hamas for these unspeakable horrors that they've been engaged in. And they've got over 300,000 reservists that have been mobilized. It's a big force. I think, as always, going into Gaza is not going to be easy. They've tried it before. The problem is that it's basically house-to-house fighting once you get into Gaza, and so it could be a heavy price. But on the other hand, I think it is very clear that Israel has made the decision that they have got to crush Hamas in Gaza.
If they are going to be crushing Hamas in Gaza, what about the hostages? How do they do both at the same time? The sense Joe and I got from the deputy chief of mission at the Israeli embassy here in Washington, D.C., was that the hostages may just become collateral damage.
Yeah, it's a tough choice. Obviously, on the one hand, they're going to initiate an offensive in Gaza. On the other hand, they do have to worry about these hostages. I'm assuming that at the same time they're conducting this offensive, that they're making every effort to try to gather intelligence as to where these hostages may be located, and then use that intelligence to try to see if they can do some kind of special operation to rescue them. So I don't think they've given up on it, but clearly they cannot simply be blackmailed by Hamas. They have got to do what they believe is necessary in order to secure Israel.
Well, you have unique experience here, obviously, in the period of time in which you served in the Pentagon and in the CIA. You oversaw the capture and killing of Osama bin Laden, and there have been a lot of references here to the so-called war on terror. How difficult will it be for Israel to conduct an asymmetrical war with a non-state entity? They won't see uniforms, of course, Mr. Secretary, when they go into Gaza.
In many ways, we had the same issue in going after al-Qaeda. You know, we made the same decision that Israel's making after 9/11, which was that we had to do everything necessary to make sure that al-Qaeda was crushed and did not have the opportunity to conduct another 9/11 campaign. In order to conduct that campaign, we had to do a tremendous amount of surveillance in order to make sure that we were looking at the right targets. We went after those targets and ultimately, of course, got bin Laden. I think Israel, in many ways, has made the decision that because of the atrocities committed by Hamas, they have to go in and defeat Hamas. And the only place Hamas is held up right now is in Gaza. Even though it's rough territory, I think Israel is probably now going through the process of thinking, how do we go into Gaza? How many columns do we send into Gaza? How much is done by artillery? How much is done by missiles of one kind or another? And do we use special forces to go in and try to attack specific targets? They may do a combination of all of those strategies in order to be able to ultimately win this part of their war.
I want to ask you about a state actor, and that's Iran. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan discussed the connection to Iran earlier today at the White House press briefing.
We've said since the beginning that Iran is complicit in this attack in a broad sense because they have provided the lion's share of the funding for the military wing of Hamas. They have provided training. They have provided capabilities. They have provided support. As to the question of whether Iran knew about this attack in advance or helped plan or direct this attack, we do not, as of the moment I'm standing here at the podium, have confirmation of that.
It seems Washington and Israel are looking at this evidence, and it is the working condition of Israel, per Minister Derma, that there is some direct evidence that links Iran. They're not ready to come forward with it, but this White House doesn't seem to see it. What do you think?
Well, I think Jake Sullivan is right that there's a long history here of Iran supporting Hamas, supporting Hezbollah, actually providing missiles to Hamas, providing support for terrorism in the region. So there's a long history here. And the Wall Street Journal article yesterday pretty much confirmed what they thought was a direct involvement by Iran in training and planning the Hamas mission in Israel. The United States states that we don't have clear information that that was the case. And I'm sure intelligence now is going through the process of seeing whether or not they can get the kind of firm information they need in order to make that judgment.
I'll ask you what we asked John Kirby earlier this hour, Mr. Secretary. The fact that the Gerald Ford strike group, the carrier group, is being moved toward Israel tells you what? Is that simply projecting power to be a deterrent, as the administration says, or will play a more precise role in what Israel is trying to accomplish?
Well, there's no question there's a lot of firepower in that group, and I'm glad to see them moving it into position. But as far as I can see right now, the name of the game is to provide the Israelis with whatever weapons and support they need in order to defend their country. And that means that, the United States is not going to get directly involved in going after specific targets. Now, is there a chance this war could expand? Certainly is. I mean, if Hezbollah suddenly decides to move in from Lebanon, if Iran makes some moves as well, then without question, this war could expand very rapidly, in which event, the United States would have to make a decision as to how much direct assistance it's going to provide. But at this point, the hope is that Israel can accomplish this on their own.